And just one more quick note, Aaron. The Biden administration has blocked a UN resolution to condemn Israel's violence at the Al-Aqsa compound and demand and to call for an update on the situation. And this takes place as the Biden State Department simultaneously denounces peace talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which are being brokered by China. So it's clear what the Biden administration is seeking to do, the same as the Trump administration, to give Israel carte blanche to rampage through the neighborhood. And what these peace talks are doing is removing Saudi Arabia as a coalition partner in the regional war that Israel wanted to wage against Iran, something that humanity should be happy about, but the Biden administration is not.
Yes, Saudi Arabia just basically announced that it's suspending its war on Yemen. And so peace is breaking out. And there was a report in the Wall Street Journal this week that the director of the CIA, William Burns, flew over to Saudi Arabia and, quote, expressed frustration, unquote, with Saudi Arabia because they've made peace deals with Iran and also are talking about a peace deal with Syria. And they did so in talks brokered by Russia and China. So the CIA is outraged, very frustrated at peace breaking out in areas that it wants to control.
Yeah, here it is. I said the State Department, but it's actually the CIA director, which is more critical if you think about CIA collaboration with Saudi Arabia and what it means and what kind of threats he could have meted out. But CIA complained U.S. was blindsided by Saudi outreach to Syria and Iran. So, yeah, it also means that they're concerned that that Syrian civilians won't be starved into oblivion anymore as Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president, restores relations with the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and other regional partners. And here's the Wall Street Journal article. In the weeks since it was announced, Saudi Arabia has also neared an agreement to restore diplomatic ties with Syria. These negotiations were mediated by Russia. Damn, Russia's brokering peace. It's terrible. Leaving the U.S. on the sidelines of another major development in the Middle East. In an unannounced visit to Saudi Arabia early this week, CIA Director Burns expressed frustration with the Saudis. He told Mohammed bin Salman that the U.S. felt blindsided by Riyadh's rapprochement with Iran and Syria, countries that remain heavily sanctioned by the West under the auspices of Washington's global rivals. So Burns, I mean, first of all, Burns wanted the CIA, and Burns knew him. They wanted Prince Nayef in because Prince Nayef had always been the pal of the CIA. He was the longtime security director for Saudi Arabia, and he was wounded by an Al-Qaeda attack decades ago. And supposedly, as the story goes, it led him into kind of addiction to painkillers and maybe other drugs, and he was left sort of incapacitated. And then that allowed bin Salman to kind of work his way in as crown prince and de facto leader, as King Abdullah was kind of senile. And then you have the whole Khashoggi thing take place. I mean, so many things that happened in the past, I'm seeing in a different light now, like the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. He was on his way to a peace summit with Iran in Iraq, with Saudi Arabia when he was killed. So the U.S. was trying to prevent that.
Yeah.
And then the whole Khashoggi thing, I see it in a different light.
Yeah. What's funny about William Burns getting so mad at these peace talks is that his memoir is called The Back Channel, which is all about his skill at, back channeling and having deals on the side, even with our enemies, and what an important thing that is. So here are some back channels taking place outside of U.S. control. He's deployed to fly over there to express his frustration. And that line there in the journal about how these countries that Saudi Arabia is talking to, Iran and Syria, are heavily sanctioned. That's what this is about. These deals make it harder for the U.S. to isolate these countries and starve their children and deprive them of food and medicine. And that's what the Biden administration is upset about, because it deprives them of that tool of leverage. As you've written about, Richard Nephew, who works for the Biden administration, bragged about the art of sanctions, how, being able to impose sieges on these countries gives the U.S. leverage. It's the art. So what Burns is mad about is these peace deals are undermining the art of those sanctions. And I want to ask you, Max, given the fact that Saudi Arabia and the UAE are defying U.S. orders here and are making peace with Iran and Syria. What does that mean for the think tanks, like the pro-dirty war think tanks that they fund in D.C., who've spent so much time going after us and promoting sanctions, promoting the dirty war in Syria? What does that mean for them? Do you think people like Charles Lister, who's funded by the same Gulf monarchies that are now changing their policy a little bit, does that mean that they continue in their staunch advocacy for sanctions and war, or are they going to be forced to change their position because their funders' policy is changing as well?
It's a good question. I think it'll be years before the think tanks reorient themselves. And by the way, since you brought up think tanks, I mean, the Carnegie Endowment was Bill Burns' think tank. And right when he left to be CIA director, they brought Matt Duss in. I think the think tanks are just cards that the Gulf states use to maintain their influence in Washington. They're not going away. The larger issue here is that Saudi Arabia is now able to play both sides off one another because everyone needs their oil. Mm-hmm. China is one of the most oil hungry countries on the planet, and they are now buying Saudi oil in the renminbi, in Chinese currency. So de-dollarization is taking place. This actually has been acknowledged by Fareed Zakaria, one of the Biden administration State Department's closest allies, on his Sunday show. And it was a very succinct, concise, and I thought honest description of what's taking place to the dollar. The petrodollar is really the basis of American empire, and we're seeing that fall away. So it makes me, as I said, it makes me rethink the Khashoggi affair. Jamal Khashoggi was said to be a CIA asset. He was a really important U.S.-backed Saudi dissident who was being leveraged against Mohammed bin Salman. He was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul under mysterious circumstances. But then you had Gina Haspel, the CIA director, running around supposedly with audio of his killing. I don't know how she got it, playing it for world leaders to get them to sanction and attack Saudi Arabia. So it was obvious the U.S. wanted Mohammed bin Salman out. And we thought maybe it's because he's becoming too independent. They certainly pushed him away from the U.S., and now they're paying the price. And I think that they sensed that he was already moving away from them, that they couldn't control him. And so Burns's visit is sort of a last-ditch attempt. And for the Saudis, I mean, as you mentioned, ending the Yemen war, finding an exit ramp on Yemen is definitely in their interest. They also have a security situation inside their own borders in the region of Qatif, which is where the Saudi Shia minority lives. Remember, Saudi Arabia executed the Shia leader, Mohammed Nimr al-Nimr, who, just grisly execution as part of a wave of executions when Mohammed bin Salman came in. And there have been riots and protests there, but a deal with Iran would certainly improve the security situation inside Saudi Arabia. So, and for Iran, well, of course, it's obvious why they would want to make peace with Saudi Arabia. If they can overcome this and China and Russia can broker it, it's one of the biggest blows to U.S. empire since the end of the Vietnam War. I can't think of anything else, along with the de-dollarization process. So the world is changing so rapidly before our eyes. And we started this live stream with Israel-Palestine. Well, the only way Palestinians are going to get out of the nightmare the long nightmare they've lived through is weakening of U.S. hegemony. They've always understood that. So this process, I think, could actually lead, perhaps, who knows, to an honest peace plan for Israel-Palestine brokered by another nation, maybe a country like China.
This year must be what? This year, I believe, is the 30th anniversary of the fake peace process, or is it 90? Is it 94? I don't remember. 93 or 94. So we've had 30 years of this scam peace process, which has just been such a disaster. And maybe we'll finally break out of its clutches. But man, what a scam that was.
Yeah. No, I mean, it wasn't just a scam. It was what laid the basis for the crisis we're living through. Because, I mean, the whole peace process was about hard separation of the Palestinians from Jewish Israelis. So it laid the basis for the apartheid wall through the West Bank, for sealing off Gaza, and the whole destabilization of Israeli politics. When obviously the answer is sort of equality from the river to the sea as a means of challenging Zionism. And that's what the Palestinians who opposed Oslo were advocating. That's what Palestinians who support BDS are advocating.
Yeah.
We had a question about, and thank you for that super chat. We had a question about the UAE normalizing with Syria, and when will Russia stop Israel from bombing Syria? Aaron, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in there.
Well, that's a great question. Russia lets Israel bomb Syria. If it wanted to, it could step in and stop it, but it doesn't. And that's because Russia, I'm assuming, I think they're prioritizing their relationship with Israel. I hope I said that right. Russia, if it wanted to, could stop Israel from bombing Syria. But Russia is prioritizing its relationship with Israel for whatever reasons I don't fully understand. But
one reason could be Ukraine. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is part of the theory that the Biden administration and the West were launching a color revolution by backing these liberal protests against Netanyahu, which is that Netanyahu's administration has refused to supply weapons to Ukraine or diplomatically openly support Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Why? One, because Russia is engaged in security coordination with Israel to allow it to bomb inside Syria, which makes, when I was in Syria, this was making Syrians very, very mad.
Yes. Yes.
They were furious about this. Two, there are close to 2 million, at least 1.5 million Israeli Jews from Russia inside Israel, which helped them win the demographic trench war against the Palestinians. And they have their own representatives like Avigdor Lieberman, who come out of Netanyahu's Likud party and maintain ties to Russia. Lieberman comes from Moldova, but they maintain ties to Russia. And there have been rallies in support of Russia's war effort inside Israel, like large rallies.
Yeah.
And they're not treated the same way they would be like if they happened in the US or Germany, where people would see it as this giant scandal. So that's why I think that's taking place. And Syria is just coming back into the fold because it's just a natural restoration of ties now that the dirty war is over. I think we haven't even covered the attacks on US troops in Northeast Syria, but it seems like only a matter of time before those US troops are winkled out as Syria starts to normalize with its neighbors.
Especially now that Syria is also talking to Turkey. And if a rapprochement happens there and perhaps even Turkish troops withdraw, that makes it harder for the U.S. to maintain its control of the parts of Syria that it has. And it gives the U.S. one less partner in strangulating Syria. But I'd love to see the Russian government explain why it lets Israel bomb Syria so much, because Israel's bombed Syria hundreds of times. And it's, when I was there too, I heard the same thing. People are really frustrated. I heard gratitude toward Russia because Russia stepped in to stop the spread of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but still anger that Russia lets Israel carry out these periodic bombings that terrorize Syrians pretty much every single week now. This happens.
Yeah.
Even after the earthquake, Israel's still bombing the airports of Syria, hindering the delivery of aid.
Yeah. It's one of their last cards, and they are at the same time frightened of real retaliation, which will come from Lebanon, as we said.